The frost on the doorknob bit into Caleb Stanton's palm as he pulled open the heavy wooden door, expecting nothing more than the pale light of a winter dawn, and perhaps a deer wandering too close to his homestead. Instead, he found himself staring at an orc woman, her green skin almost luminous in the early morning light, her breath misting in the cold air as she stood with a spear gripped in both hands, her dark eyes fixed on the tree line beyond his property. She did not turn when the door opened, and Caleb realized with a jolt that ran through his entire body that she had been standing there all night, motionless as a statue, keeping watch over his home. "What in the gods' names are you doing?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep and shock. The orc woman finally turned her head, and he saw exhaustion written in every line of her face, though her posture remained rigid and alert. Her tusks, small and curved, caught the light as she spoke. "Keeping you alive, human. There were wolves in the night, 3 of them. They came close twice." Caleb stepped out onto the porch, the cold immediately seeping through his thin nightshirt. He scanned the snow-covered ground and saw tracks, large ones, circling his property. His blood went cold as he realized how close the predators had come to his door. "You fought them off." "I did not need to fight. They saw me and knew better than to challenge an orc warrior." She swayed slightly, catching herself on the spear shaft. "But I am very tired now." He looked at her properly then, taking in the worn leather armor that left her muscular arms bare despite the freezing temperature, the old cloak that was too thin for winter, the way her fingers had gone pale where they gripped the weapon. "Come inside. You will freeze to death out here." "I am fine," she said, but her words came slower than before, and he could see she was lying. "You are not fine. You are half frozen and exhausted. Come inside before you collapse." When she did not move, he added, "Please. If you truly spent all night protecting my home, the least I can do is offer you warmth and food." The orc woman studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was a trick. Finally, she nodded once and followed him into the cabin, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was close to giving out. Caleb shut the door behind her and immediately went to stoke the fire in the hearth, building it up until flames crackled and heat began to fill the room. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair closest to the fire. She sat but kept the spear across her knees, her eyes tracking his every movement as he moved about the cabin. Caleb was used to that look now, the wariness of someone who expected violence at any moment. He had seen it often enough in the war, in the faces of soldiers who had survived too many battles and learned that trust was a luxury that could get you killed. He put a pot of water on to boil and began pulling out ingredients for a proper breakfast. Oats, dried apples, honey, strips of salted pork. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the simple tasks grounding him as his mind raced with questions. Why had an orc woman been standing guard outside his door? How had she even known he was in danger? And most importantly, what did she want from him? "I am called Grasha," the orc woman said suddenly, her deep voice cutting through the silence. "Of the Stonefang clan, or I was before they cast me out." Caleb glanced at her over his shoulder. "Cast out, why?" "Because I would not kill humans on command." She said it matter-of-factly, without bitterness, but he heard the pain underneath. "Because I said the war should end. Because I refused to burn a village where children lived." He turned fully to face her, forgetting the food for a moment. "That must have taken great courage." Grasha shrugged, a very human gesture that looked strange on her powerful frame. "It was simply right, but my clan did not see it that way. So now I have no clan, no home, no purpose." She looked down at her hands, and for the first time her warrior's mask slipped. "I have been wandering these lands for 3 months, surviving but not truly living." "Why did you guard my home?" Caleb asked quietly. "I saw you yesterday in the village market. The humans there were angry with you. I heard them say you were a traitor to your kind because you would not join their militia to drive out the orc settlements to the north. They said terrible things about what they would do to you." She met his eyes. "I understood what it means to be cast out by your own people for choosing mercy over violence. So when I saw the wolf tracks near your homestead last night, I decided to keep watch. I did not want you to die for being kind." Something shifted in Caleb's chest, a sensation he had not felt in years. He had been alone since coming to this frontier homestead, 2 years ago, choosing isolation over the constant judgment of people who could not understand why he had deserted the army, rather than continue fighting in a war he believed was unjust. He had expected to live out his days in solitude, tending his land and speaking to no one. But now here was someone who understood, who had made the same impossible choice and paid the same terrible price. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with his whole heart. "You saved my life. Perhaps. Or perhaps the wolves would have passed by without incident, but I could not take that chance." Grasha's eyes were starting to droop, exhaustion finally overtaking her warrior's discipline. "When did you last eat?" Caleb asked. 2 days ago, I caught a rabbit." He cursed under his breath and turned back to the stove, working faster. Within minutes, he had 2 bowls of thick oat porridge mixed with apples and honey, with strips of fried pork on the side. He brought them to the small table and set one in front of Grasha. "Eat. Then you sleep." "I should not stay. Your human neighbors already hate you. If they discover you sheltered an orc, they will do more than speak angry words." But even as she protested, Grasha was reaching for the spoon, her body overriding her caution. "Let them try," Caleb said grimly. "I did not survive 6 years of war just to be frightened by farmers with pitchforks." They ate in silence, Grasha devouring her food with the single-minded focus of someone who had gone hungry too long. Caleb found himself watching her, noting the scars that marked her arms and shoulders, the way her pointed ears twitched at every small sound, the surprising delicacy with which she handled the spoon despite her calloused, powerful hands. She was beautiful, he realized with some surprise. Not in the way human women were beautiful, but in the way a sword was beautiful, or a wolf, something made for purpose and strength and survival. When the bowls were empty, Grasha's head began to nod forward, and she jerked herself awake with visible effort. "I should go." "You should sleep," Caleb countered. "Take my bed, I will keep watch." "I cannot take your bed." "Then we will both be stubborn fools who collapse from exhaustion," he said, crossing his arms. "I am offering freely, Grasha of Stonefang. I am not in your debt. You guarded me last night, so I will guard you today. That is fair." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair, but wake me if there is any danger." "I will." Caleb showed her to his bedroom, a small space barely large enough for the bed and a chest of clothes, and watched as she lay down on top of the blankets, still gripping her spear. She was asleep within seconds, her breathing deepening into the steady rhythm of true rest. He closed the door quietly and returned to the main room, his mind spinning. Everything about this situation was impossible. Orcs and humans did not help each other. They certainly did not shelter each other or share meals or stand guard through the night. The war between their peoples had raged for 2 generations, fed by hatred and fear and the kind of bitter history that made peace seem like a fantasy. And yet here he was, with an orc warrior sleeping in his bed, and the strangest part was that it felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. Caleb spent the day doing his usual chores, feeding his chickens and 2 goats, chopping wood, checking his traps. But he stayed close to the cabin, alert for any sign of trouble. The sky was heavy with clouds that promised more snow, and the wind had a vicious edge that made him grateful for his thick coat. When he came back inside after each task, he found himself checking on Grasha, standing in the doorway to make sure she was still breathing, still safe. She slept through the entire day and into the evening. Caleb made dinner, a simple stew of root vegetables and rabbit, and was just debating whether to wake her when he heard movement from the bedroom. Grasha emerged, looking disoriented and much younger without the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. He guessed she was perhaps 20, maybe 21, barely more than a girl despite her warrior's bearing. "How long did I sleep?" she asked. "Most of the day. It is nearly evening now." He ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her. "You needed the rest." Grasha took the bowl and sat at the table, eating more slowly this time, as if savoring each bite. "I cannot remember the last time I slept somewhere warm and safe, or ate 2 meals in one day. How have you been surviving?" "Hunting when I can, stealing from human settlements when I must, though I hate doing it, sleeping in caves or under trees, avoiding orc patrols and human militias both." She paused, her expression darkening. "It is not a life. It is just existing day after day, waiting to see which will kill me first, the cold or the hunger or the enemies on all sides." Caleb sat down across from her, his own stew forgotten. "Stay here." Grasha looked up sharply. "What? Stay here? I have space. I have food enough for 2 if we are careful, and the gods know I could use help with the work around this place." The words came out in a rush, surprising even him, but once they were spoken, he knew they were true. "You said you have no purpose. Help me work this land. It is honest work, and you will have a roof over your head and food in your belly." "You do not know what you are offering," Grasha said quietly. "If your neighbors discover you are sheltering an orc, they will drive you out, or worse." "My neighbors already hate me. You said so yourself." "What is one more reason for them to despise me?" He leaned forward, holding her gaze. "I am tired of being alone, Grasha. I am tired of every human I meet looking at me like a traitor because I would not murder people who never did me any harm. You understand that. You made the same choice." "Yes," she whispered. "I understand. Then stay, at least through the winter. When spring comes, if you want to leave, I will not stop you. But you should not have to freeze and starve in the wilderness just because both our peoples are too blind to see that this war is madness." Grasha was quiet for so long that Caleb thought she would refuse. Then she set down her spoon and extended her hand, palm up, in what he recognized as an orc gesture of agreement. "Through the winter. I will work hard, Caleb Stanton. You will not regret this." He clasped her hand, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped a lifetime of fighting. "I already do not regret it." The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Grasha proved to be a tireless worker, tackling every task with the same focused intensity she had shown standing guard through the night. She chopped wood with an efficiency that left Caleb stunned, her powerful arms swinging the axe as if it weighed nothing. She mucked out the small barn without complaint, repaired the fence that Caleb had been meaning to fix for months, and even proved surprisingly skilled at tending the goats, who seemed to sense her gentleness beneath the warrior's exterior. In return, Caleb taught her the rhythms of homestead life, showing her how to preserve food for the winter, how to read the weather signs, how to coax vegetables from the cold frame he had built against the south wall of the cabin. They worked side by side during the short winter days, and in the long evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, sharing stories of their pasts in a way that felt like slowly unwrapping wounds to let them heal in the light. Caleb learned that Grasha had been training as a warrior since she could walk, that she had 3 brothers who no longer spoke her name, that her mother had wept when the clan elders pronounced her exile, but had not intervened. Grasha learned that Caleb had been a soldier for 6 years, that he had a sister somewhere in the eastern provinces whom he had not seen since before the war, that he had nightmares about the village he had been ordered to destroy, and the order he had finally refused to follow. "Do you regret leaving the army?" Grasha asked one night as they sat together mending clothes, a pile of torn shirts and socks between them. Caleb considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused my family. I regret that my desertion might have made things harder for other soldiers who disagreed with our orders, but I do not regret refusing to burn that village. If I had followed that command, I would not be able to live with myself." "My clan said I was weak," Grasha said softly. "They said a true warrior does not question orders. They said mercy was a human failing, not an orc virtue. Your clan was wrong. Mercy is not weakness. It is strength. It takes far more courage to choose kindness when everyone around you is choosing cruelty." He paused in his stitching to look at her. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Grasha." She ducked her head, but not before he saw the flush darken her green skin. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you stood in the freezing cold all night to protect a stranger. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever seen. I know you would rather be cast out by your entire people than compromise your principles." He smiled. "That is not weakness." "Thank you," she murmured, and they returned to their mending in a silence that felt warm and comfortable. But the peace could not last forever. A month after Grasha came to stay, Caleb made his weekly trip to the village for supplies, leaving early in the morning with his sled and a list of essentials. He told Grasha to stay inside and keep out of sight, knowing that even a glimpse of her through the window could mean disaster. The village was small, just a few dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads, but it served all the homesteaders and farmers in the surrounding hills. Caleb did his shopping quickly, speaking to no one more than necessary, but as he was loading his sled, Marcus Fleming, the self-appointed leader of the local militia, approached with 3 other men at his back. "Stanton," Fleming said, his voice falsely jovial. "We have not seen much of you lately, keeping to yourself up there on your hill." "Just tending my land," Caleb said neutrally, continuing to secure his supplies. "Funny thing. Henderson was out hunting last week, and he swears he saw smoke from your chimney at odd hours." "Lots of smoke, like you are heating a space for more than one person." Fleming stepped closer, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You would not be harboring anyone up there, would you? I am alone, as always." "See, that is what I thought. But then I got to thinking about how much would you have been cutting. Henderson saw your woodpile when he passed by, said it looked like you were preparing for 2 people to survive the winter, not one." Fleming's hand rested on the knife at his belt. "Makes a man wonder." Caleb straightened slowly, measuring the distances between himself and the 4 men, calculating his chances if this turned violent. "I like to be prepared. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all unless you are preparing for the wrong kind of company." Fleming lowered his voice. "There have been reports of an orc in these parts. A female, armed, dangerous. The fort up north put out a notice asking us to keep watch. Said she is a deserter from one of their war parties, probably spying for an invasion." Ice flooded Caleb's veins, but he kept his expression carefully blank. "I have not seen any orcs. If I do, I will be sure to let you know. You do that." Fleming stepped back, but his eyes remained hard. "Because if we find out someone is sheltering an orc, helping the enemy, well, that is treason, Stanton, and we deal with traitors harshly on the frontier." Caleb finished loading his sled and left the village as calmly as he could manage, but the moment he was out of sight, he urged his horse into a trot, then a canter, hurrying back toward the homestead. His mind raced with possibilities, all of them bad. If the militia came searching, they would find Grasha. If they found her, they would kill her and probably him as well. He needed to warn her, needed to figure out what to do. He arrived home to find Grasha waiting by the window, her spear in hand, tension written in every line of her body. She must have heard him coming from far off, must have been ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. "What happened?" she asked as soon as he came through the door. Caleb told her everything, watching as her expression grew grimmer with each word. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Then I must leave, tonight." "No," Caleb said firmly. "You heard what they said. If they find me here, they will kill us both. So we make sure they do not find you." He began pacing, thinking hard. The militia are not soldiers. They are farmers and shopkeepers playing at being warriors. If we are smart, we can stay ahead of them. For how long? Winter has barely begun. You think we can hide for 3 more months? Grasha shook her head. "I will not let you die for me, Caleb. You have already done more than anyone ever has. I will leave and you will be safe." "I will not be safe," he said, stopping to face her. "Do you think Fleming will believe I was not helping you? The moment you disappear, he will assume I warned you. He will come after me anyway. Then come with me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Caleb stared at Grasha, at this fierce, principled woman who had somehow become the most important person in his life in just a few short weeks. The thought of watching her walk out into the snow alone, of returning to his empty cabin and his solitary existence, was suddenly unbearable. "All right," he heard himself say, "we leave together. Not tonight, though. We need supplies, we need a plan. Give me 2 days to prepare." Grasha looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. 2 days. But if they come before then, we run immediately. No fighting, no heroics. We just run. Agreed. The next 2 days were a flurry of careful preparation. Caleb packed their most essential supplies into bundles they could carry on their backs, choosing warmth and food over everything else. He sold his goats to a farmer who lived miles away and asked no questions, claiming he was heading east to find new land. He turned his chickens loose, figuring they had a better chance foraging than starving in an empty coop. He took everything of value that could be easily transported and hid what remained, hoping perhaps someday he might return. Through it all, Grasha worked beside him, her face set in grim determination. They barely spoke except to coordinate their tasks, but Caleb found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved through the space they had shared, the quiet competence with which she handled each preparation. This cabin had been just a shelter before, a place to hide from a world that had rejected him. But Grasha had made it a home, and leaving it felt like tearing away a piece of himself. On the second night, as they sat by the fire for perhaps the last time, Grasha finally broke the heavy silence. "Where will we go?" "North," Caleb said. "Into the mountains. I know some places up there, old trapper cabins that might still be standing. We can wait out the worst of winter, then decide our next move in spring. The mountains are orc territory. If we encounter a war party, they will not listen to my explanations. They will kill you for being human and kill me for protecting you. Then we avoid orc patrols as well as human ones. We stay hidden, stay smart, stay alive." He looked at her across the dancing firelight. "I am not going to lie and say this will be easy. It will probably be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. But I would rather face it with you than go back to being alone." Grasha's dark eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears. "I feel the same. I just wish our peoples were not so determined to hate each other. I wish we could simply live in peace." "Maybe someday," Caleb said quietly. "But until then, we make our own peace. Just the 2 of us against the world." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face from merely striking to genuinely beautiful. "Just the 2 of us. I like that." They left before dawn the next morning, slipping away from the homestead like ghosts. Caleb took one last look at the cabin he had built with his own hands, at the land he had cultivated, and the life he had carved out of the wilderness, and felt grief wash over him. But then Grasha touched his arm, gentle and grounding, and he turned away from the past to face whatever future they could make together. The journey into the mountains was brutal. Snow fell almost constantly, and the temperature dropped until even breathing hurt. They traveled during the brief hours of daylight and huddled together for warmth during the long nights, sharing body heat and blankets in a way that felt both necessary and intimate. Caleb found himself hyper-aware of every point where Grasha's body touched his, the solid warmth of her against his back, the way her breath stirred his hair when she slept. He was falling for her. The realization hit him one night as they sat together in a shallow cave, sharing a meal of dried meat and hard bread. He watched Grasha eat, noting the way she always offered him the larger portion, the way she positioned herself between him and the cave entrance even in their sleep, still protecting him. She was brave and strong and kind, and he wanted nothing more than to tell her how he felt. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped by fear and uncertainty. What if she did not feel the same? What if his feelings complicated their already impossible situation? So he said nothing, and tried to ignore the way his heart raced whenever she smiled at him. They had been traveling for a week when they encountered the orc patrol. Caleb and Grasha were crossing a high valley, making for a distant tree line, when Grasha suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him down behind a boulder. 6 orcs emerged from the forest, all male, all armed, moving in a tactical formation that spoke of military discipline. "Stonefang warriors," Grasha breathed, her voice barely audible. "My brothers are among them." Caleb looked at her and saw pain written clearly on her face. "Can you tell which ones?" "The one in front with the red cloak. That is Krogr, my eldest brother. And the one to his left with the twin axes, that is Mersh." Her hand tightened on Caleb's arm. "They will not hesitate to kill us both if they see us." They waited, barely breathing, as the patrol passed within 50 yards of their hiding place. Caleb could see the orcs clearly now, their green skin darker than Grasha's, their tusks larger and more prominent. They were bigger than her too, massively built, and moved with a predatory grace that made Caleb's soldier instincts scream warnings. Just when it seemed they would pass by without incident, one of the orcs stopped. He was not one of Grasha's brothers, but a younger warrior with bright eyes and an alert posture. He turned slowly, scanning the valley, and Caleb knew with sickening certainty that they had been spotted. "Run," Grasha hissed. They ran. Caleb had always been fast. His time in the army had honed that speed. But Grasha was faster, her longer legs eating up the ground as they sprinted for the trees. Behind them, shouts erupted in the orcish language, guttural and sharp, and then came the sounds of pursuit. They crashed into the forest and Grasha took the lead, weaving between trees with the confidence of someone navigating familiar territory. Caleb followed, his lungs burning in the cold air, his pack bouncing painfully against his back. An axe flew past his head and buried itself in a tree trunk with a meaty thunk. He ducked, stumbled, caught himself, and kept running. "This way," Grasha gasped, veering sharply to the left. They scrambled down a steep slope, half running and half sliding, using trees to control their descent. At the bottom was a frozen stream, and Grasha led them across it and into a tangle of rocks and fallen logs on the far side. She pulled Caleb down into a hollow beneath an overhanging stone, both of them pressed together in the tiny space, trying desperately to quiet their ragged breathing. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Caleb could hear voices now, speaking in Orcish, and though he did not understand the words, the tone was clear enough. They were organizing a search, spreading out to cover more ground. Grasha's face was inches from his in the confined space, her eyes wide and frightened. He reached up and took her hand, squeezing gently, trying to offer comfort even though his own heart was hammering with terror. Footsteps crunched in the snow above them. Someone was standing directly over their hiding place, so close that Caleb could have reached up and touched their boot. A voice spoke, deep and considering, and another voice answered from farther away. The first voice spoke again, this time with a note of finality, and the footsteps moved away. They waited. Minutes stretched into hours as the sounds of the search gradually faded. The sun moved across the sky, the quality of light changing from morning brightness to afternoon gold. Still they waited, neither willing to risk emerging too soon. Caleb's legs cramped and his back ached, but he did not move, did not make a sound. Finally, when the shadows were growing long and no sound had disturbed the forest for over an hour, Grasha carefully eased out of their hiding place. She checked in all directions, her body tense and ready to bolt, then motioned for Caleb to follow. "We need to keep moving," she whispered. "They will return tomorrow to continue searching." They traveled through the night, pushing their exhausted bodies to the limit, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the patrol. It was dangerous, moving in the dark, but more dangerous to stay. When dawn finally came, they found themselves in a narrow canyon with high walls on either side, a place that felt defensible. Caleb built a tiny fire, barely more than a handful of coals, while Grasha kept watch. They ate in silence, too tired for conversation. But when the meal was done and they huddled together for warmth, Grasha spoke quietly. "That was my brother who stood above us, Krogger." I recognized his voice. Caleb did not know what to say. "I am sorry." He said the tracks looked human. Said it was not worth pursuing a single human when they were hunting for something more important. She laughed, a bitter sound. He walked away not knowing he was standing above his own sister, not knowing and not caring. "He is a fool then. You are worth 100 of him." Grasha looked at him, something intense and unreadable in her expression. "Why do you say such things?" "Because they are true. Because you are the most remarkable person I have ever known. Because every day I spend with you, I am grateful for whatever twist of fate brought you to my door." The words poured out before he could stop them, carrying weeks of pent-up feeling. "Because I am half in love with you, Grasha of Stonefang, and I have been since the day I found you standing guard in the snow." Silence. Grasha stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with shock. Caleb felt his face flush with embarrassment and fear. He had said too much, revealed too much. He started to turn away to apologize, but Grasha caught his face between her hands and kissed him. It was nothing like kisses he had shared before. Her tusks were an unfamiliar presence, her lips different in texture and temperature. But it was perfect, fierce and gentle at once, full of longing and relief and 1,000 unspoken words. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Grasha rested her forehead against his. "I thought I was alone in feeling this way," she whispered. "I thought you saw me as just a burden you had taken on, someone to be protected out of obligation. Never a burden. Never." He cupped her face, marveling at the feel of her skin, warm and alive beneath his palms. "You are everything to me, Grasha. Everything." They kissed again, longer this time, discovering each other with a tenderness that made Caleb's chest ache. When they finally settled down to rest, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, no longer just sharing warmth but offering comfort and affection, and the beginning of something neither had dared to hope for. The next weeks took on a different quality. They were still fleeing, still hunted by both human and orc forces, still struggling against the brutal winter. But now they had each other in a new way, and that made all the difference. They learned to communicate with touches and glances, to anticipate each other's needs, to work together with the seamless coordination of people who had become truly bonded. They found the trapper cabin Caleb had remembered, a tiny structure built against a cliff face, partially collapsed, but still offering shelter. Together they repaired it, patching holes and reinforcing weak points, transforming it from a ruin into something livable. They set snares and hunted small game, carefully rationing their dwindling supplies. And in the evenings, they held each other by the fire and talked about everything and nothing, building a shared language of intimacy and trust. "If the world were different," Grasha said one night, "what would you want our life to look like?" Caleb considered the question. "A small farm somewhere peaceful, a few animals, a good garden, maybe near the ocean where we could watch the sunrise over the water." He smiled. "What about you?" "I never thought about such things before. Warriors do not dream of peaceful lives. But now," she nestled closer against him, "I would want exactly what you described. A home where we could simply be together without fear or hiding, where we could wake each morning knowing we were safe and loved." "Someday," Caleb promised. "When this war finally ends, when people stop being so God's damned stupid about bloodlines and species, we will have that life." "You truly believe the war will end?" "I have to believe it. The alternative is too grim to contemplate." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, which smelled like wood smoke and pine. "But even if it does not end in our lifetime, we will find a way. We will carve out a space in this world where we can exist together." Winter deepened. The snows grew heavier, and the cold more intense, until there were days when even stepping outside the cabin was dangerous. They stayed close, conserving energy and supplies, telling each other stories to pass the time. Grasha taught Caleb words in the Orcish language, laughing at his terrible pronunciation. Caleb taught her card games his sister had shown him as a child, and was consistently beaten because Grasha had a mind like a steel trap for strategy. They made love for the first time on a night when a blizzard raged outside, the wind howling like a living thing. It was tentative and awkward at first, two people from different species learning how to please each other, but they figured it out together with patience and humor and tenderness. Afterward, as they lay tangled in their shared blankets, Grasha cried, and when Caleb asked what was wrong, she shook her head. "Nothing is wrong. These are happy tears. I never thought I would know this feeling, this completeness. I thought I would die alone in the wilderness, unmourned and forgotten. But you gave me hope, Caleb. You gave me a reason to keep fighting." "You gave me the same," he said, holding her close. "Before you came, I was just existing, but you made me remember what it means to truly live." As winter gradually released its grip, and the first signs of spring appeared, they began planning their next move. They could not stay in the mountains forever. Their supplies were nearly exhausted, and hunting had become difficult. But they could not return to human lands, and traveling deeper into orc territory was equally dangerous. "There are places," Grasha said one morning as they sat together watching the sunrise, "far to the west, beyond the war zones, settlements where humans and orcs live together in peace. I heard rumors of them before my exile, though I never believed they were real. You think we could reach them? Perhaps. It would be a long journey, dangerous. We would have to cross through active war zones, avoid patrols from both sides. But if these settlements truly exist, they might be our only chance at a real life together." Caleb thought about it, weighing the risks against the alternatives. Stay here and eventually starve. Try to return to human lands and face execution. Go deeper into orc territory and meet the same fate. At least heading west offered hope, however slim. Let us do it, he said. Let us go west. They spent the next week preparing, crafting new supplies from what the wilderness offered and what they could salvage from the cabin. Grasha proved incredibly skilled at making things, fashioning snowshoes from bent branches and strips of leather, sewing new packs from animal hides, even creating a crude map based on her memory of the geography. On the day they left, they stood together outside the cabin and looked back at the small structure that had sheltered them through the worst of winter. It had been a refuge and a home, the place where they had truly become partners in every sense of the word. "Thank you," Grasha said quietly, and Caleb knew she was not talking to him but to the cabin itself, to the mountain, to whatever force had brought them here safely. They turned west and began walking. The journey was every bit as difficult as they had anticipated. Spring in the mountains meant melting snow and flooding streams, treacherous footing and unpredictable weather. They forded icy rivers that came up to their waists, climbed steep passes where one wrong step would mean a fatal fall, and navigated dense forests where visibility was measured in feet rather than miles. 3 weeks into their journey, they stumbled upon a battlefield. Bodies littered a clearing, human and orc both, the earth churned to mud and stained dark with blood. The fighting had been recent, perhaps only a day or two before, and scavengers had not yet stripped the dead. Grasha walked among the fallen with tears streaming down her face, and Caleb understood that she knew some of these orcs, that they might have been members of her former clan. He stayed close to her, offering silent support, while she spoke words in Orcish that sounded like prayers or farewells. When she was done, they searched the battlefield for supplies, taking what they needed with respect and regret. They found weapons, food, even a few coins that might be useful if they reached civilization. But the weight of what they were doing, scavenging from the dead, hung heavy on both of them. "This is what the war has made of us," Grasha said as they left the clearing. "Vultures picking at corpses. This is what hatred creates." Caleb had no answer because she was right. They pressed on. A week later, they encountered living humans for the first time, a small patrol of scouts from one of the frontier forts. Caleb and Grasha hid and watched them pass, and Caleb found himself looking at his own kind with new eyes. They were not monsters, these soldiers, just young men doing a job they probably did not fully understand. But they would kill Grasha without hesitation if they saw her, and that made them enemies regardless of their intentions. The true test came when they reached the war zone itself, a broad swath of contested territory where both human and orc forces regularly clashed. They could not avoid it. Going around would add months to their journey and take them through even more dangerous terrain. So they waited for nightfall and began crossing, moving like shadows between the scattered camps and patrol routes. It was the most terrifying experience of Caleb's life, and that included 6 years of actual combat. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. Every distant voice might be the beginning of an alarm. They crept through the darkness with agonizing slowness, sometimes freezing in place for minutes at a time when patrols passed nearby. Halfway through, disaster struck. They were navigating between 2 human encampments when a sentry, more alert than most, spotted movement and raised the alarm. Suddenly, the night erupted with shouts and torchlight, and they were running again, sprinting through the darkness with pursuit close behind. A shot rang out and Caleb felt something tug at his sleeve. Another shot kicked up dirt at his feet. Grasha grabbed his hand and pulled him into a drainage ditch, and they crawled through freezing water while boots thundered overhead and voices shouted orders. The ditch led to a culvert under a road, barely large enough for them to squeeze through. They emerged on the other side filthy and soaked, but alive and still free. They ran into the forest beyond and did not stop until the sounds of pursuit had long faded. "Too close," Caleb gasped when they finally paused to catch their breath. "That was far too close, but we made it." Grasha was grinning despite her exhaustion, a wild edge to her expression. "We actually made it through the war zone." They laughed then, the kind of slightly hysterical laughter that comes after mortal danger has passed, and held each other in the darkness, grateful to be alive and together. The lands beyond the war zone were different, quieter and less militarized. They began to see farms again, small settlements, the signs of normal life continuing despite the conflict raging to the east. But they remained cautious, avoiding contact with anyone, traveling by night and hiding during the day. 2 months after leaving the mountain cabin, they crested a ridge and saw something that made them both stop in wonder. Below them, nestled in a green valley, was a village unlike any Caleb had ever seen. Humans and orcs moved through the streets together, working side by side, talking and laughing without fear or hatred. Children of both species played together in a common yard. And at the center of the village stood a building with 2 flags flying above it, one human and one orcish, side by side in the breeze. "It is real," Grasha whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It is actually real." They made their way down into the valley slowly, hardly daring to believe what they were seeing. As they entered the village, people looked at them with curiosity but not hostility. An elderly human woman smiled and nodded. An orc man carrying lumber called out a friendly greeting in both languages. A human man in his 50s approached them, his weathered face kind. "You look like you have traveled far. Are you seeking sanctuary?" Caleb found his voice with difficulty. "Yes, we are looking for a place where we can live in peace." "Then you have found it. Welcome to New Haven." The man extended his hand and Caleb shook it, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I am called Owen Shepherd. I am one of the village elders, and you are—" "I am Caleb Stanton. This is Grasha, formerly of Clan Stonefang." Owen's eyebrows rose slightly. "Stonefang, you say?" "They are one of the more militant clans. You must have quite a story." "We do," Grasha said quietly. "A long one. Then you will have to tell it to us over dinner, but first, let me show you to a place where you can rest and clean up. You both look like you could use a hot meal and a soft bed." Owen led them through the village, pointing out important buildings and introducing them to people they passed. Everyone they met was welcoming, asking no uncomfortable questions, simply accepting their presence. It was so different from everything they had experienced that Caleb kept waiting for the trap to spring, for someone to reveal that this was all a cruel joke. But no trap came. Owen showed them to a small cottage on the edge of the village, simple but well-maintained, with 2 rooms and a functioning hearth. "This belongs to the village. We keep it for newcomers. You can stay here while you decide if you want to make New Haven your permanent home." "There is no decision to make," Grasha said firmly. "This is already home." Owen smiled. "Good. Then welcome home." Over the following weeks, Caleb and Grasha began building a new life in New Haven. The village operated on principles of cooperation and mutual respect, with everyone contributing according to their abilities. Caleb found work helping to expand the village's farming operations, putting his agricultural skills to use. Grasha joined the village guard, which was composed of both humans and orcs, and served to protect the settlement from bandits and wild animals, rather than fighting in any war. They learned the story of New Haven, how it had been founded 15 years earlier by refugees from both sides of the conflict who had grown tired of the endless fighting. The first years had been difficult, with many setbacks and near disasters as humans and orcs learned to trust each other. But they had persevered, and slowly the village had grown, attracting others who dreamed of peace. "There are a dozen settlements like this now," Owen told them one evening over dinner. "Some larger, some smaller, all dedicated to the same ideal. We believe that one day, when the war finally exhausts itself, our way of living will become the model for the future." "I hope you are right," Caleb said. "The world needs more places like this." As spring turned to summer, Caleb and Grasha settled fully into village life. They made friends, both human and orc, and found themselves part of a community in a way neither had experienced before. The cottage Owen had given them became truly theirs, filled with small touches that made it a home. Grasha cultivated a garden where she grew vegetables and flowers. Caleb built furniture and carved small decorations for their walls. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their doorstep, Grasha turned to Caleb with a serious expression. "There is something I want to ask you." "Anything," he said. "Among my people, when two warriors wish to bind their lives together, they perform a ceremony called the Oath of Shields. Each swears to guard the others back in battle and in peace, to face the world as one unit rather than two separate beings." She took his hand, her grip strong and sure. "I want to take that oath with you, Caleb. I want to make our bond formal and recognized." Caleb felt his heart swell until it seemed too large for his chest. "I want that too, but I do not know the words or the customs. I will teach you, and we can incorporate human traditions as well." "Owen told me humans have their own binding ceremonies, called marriages. We could do both," Caleb said, the idea taking shape in his mind. "A ceremony that honors both our peoples, that symbolizes what we are trying to build here." Grasha's smile was radiant. "Yes, exactly that." They spent the next month preparing, working with Owen and with Korga, the orcish elder who served as Grasha's counterpart on the village council. The ceremony they designed was unique, blending human and orcish elements into something entirely new. They would exchange vows in both languages, share a ritual meal, and then take up shields marked with symbols representing their union. The village embraced the idea with enthusiasm. A ceremony like this had never been performed in New Haven before, and it represented exactly the kind of cultural fusion the settlement aspired to. People volunteered to help with preparations, cooking food for the feast, decorating the common hall, crafting the shields that would be central to the ceremony. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer day that felt like a gift from the gods. Caleb dressed in his best clothes, simple but clean, his hands shaking slightly as he fastened his shirt. He could hardly believe this was happening, that he was about to formally bind his life to Grasha's in front of an entire community that supported them. Grasha looked stunning when he saw her, dressed in a blend of orcish and human styles. Her long dark hair braided with flowers, her green skin glowing in the sunlight. She took his hands when they stood together before the assembled villagers, and her smile was so full of joy and love that Caleb felt his eyes sting with tears. Owen spoke first, delivering words about the meaning of commitment and partnership in the human tradition. Then Korga spoke, her deep voice resonating as she explained the orcish concept of the shield oath. And then it was time for Caleb and Grasha to speak their own vows. Caleb went first, speaking in his own language. "Grasha of Stonefang, you came into my life on a winter morning, standing guard against dangers I did not even know threatened me. Since that day, you have been my protector, my partner, and my dearest friend. You have shown me what true strength looks like, what real courage means. I vow to stand beside you for all the days of my life, to guard your back as you have guarded mine, to face whatever comes with you at my side. I vow to love you, honor you, and build a life with you that reflects the peace and understanding we both believe this world can achieve." Grasha responded in Orcish first, then translated into the common tongue so all could understand. "Caleb Stanton, you showed me mercy when I had no right to expect it. You gave me shelter, safety, and purpose when I had lost everything. You taught me that kindness is not weakness, that love can exist even across the lines our peoples have drawn. I vow to be your shield in all things, to stand between you and harm, to build our home with my own hands and defend it with my last breath. I vow to love you with the entirety of my being from this day until my last day, and beyond into whatever lies after." They exchanged the shields then, taking up the beautifully crafted pieces that bore both their names and symbols representing their joining. The village erupted in cheers and applause, humans and orcs celebrating together with genuine joy. The feast that followed lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the number of people present. Caleb and Grasha sat at the center of it all, holding hands and accepting congratulations from a steady stream of well-wishers. It was everything Caleb had never dared to dream of, a celebration not just of their love but of the possibility that the world could change, that old hatreds could be overcome. Late in the evening, when the festivities were finally winding down, Caleb and Grasha walked back to their cottage under a sky full of stars. They paused at the doorstep, the same spot where they had sat together so many times before, and Grasha pulled Caleb into a long, tender kiss. "Thank you," she whispered when they finally broke apart. "For what?" Caleb asked. "For opening your door that dawn and not turning me away, for seeing me as a person rather than a monster, for giving me hope when I had none." She cupped his face in her hands, her dark eyes serious. "For loving me despite everything the world said was impossible. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done," Caleb said softly. "It is the rest of the world that is difficult." They went inside together, closing the door on the night and the village and the wider world beyond. Tomorrow they would return to their work and their responsibilities, to the daily tasks of building a life together. But tonight was theirs alone, a celebration of everything they had survived and everything they had become to each other. The summer passed in a haze of contentment. Caleb and Grasha fell into comfortable rhythms, working during the day and spending their evenings together, talking and planning and simply enjoying each other's company. They were not naive enough to think their troubles were over forever. The war still raged in the East, and prejudice still existed even in New Haven. But they had found a place where they could be themselves, where their love was not just tolerated but celebrated. In the autumn, Grasha discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the prospect of starting a family together, but also fear, because children born to human orc couples were rare and sometimes faced their own difficulties. Neither of them knew what to expect. Owen reassured them that they were not the first mixed couple in New Haven to have a child, and that the village would support them completely. "Family comes in many forms here," he said gently. "Your child will be loved and accepted, just as you are." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Grasha found it more tiring than she had anticipated. Caleb fussed over her constantly, earning fond exasperation and occasional irritation when he became too overprotective. But mostly they navigated this new phase together with the same partnership that had carried them through so much already. When winter came again, Caleb found himself thinking about that dawn a year and a half earlier, when he had opened his door to find Grasha standing guard. So much had changed since then. They had traveled impossible distances, survived dangers that should have killed them, and built a life that neither had believed possible. And now they were preparing to bring a new life into the world, a child who would represent everything they had fought for. "Do you ever regret it?" Grasha asked one night as they lay together in bed, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "Do you ever wish you had just closed the door that morning and gone back to your solitary life?" Caleb kissed her forehead, then her lips, pouring all his love into the gesture. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grasha. You and this child we made together, this life we have built. I would go through everything again, all the hardship and fear and pain, if it meant I got to be here with you." "I feel the same," she whispered. "I love you, Caleb Stanton." "I love you, Grasha Stanton." They had decided she would take his name, a human custom that felt right to both of them. It was another way of signaling their commitment to building something new, to creating their own traditions rather than being bound by the past. The baby came on a cold night in late winter, arriving after a labor that lasted nearly a full day. Caleb stayed with Grasha throughout, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and feeling utterly helpless in the face of her pain. But when the midwife finally placed the baby in Grasha's arms, all the fear and worry evaporated. Their daughter was perfect. She had green skin like her mother, but lighter, almost olive in tone. Her ears were pointed but smaller than a full orc's ears. And she had no tusks, though the midwife said that might change as she grew. She was beautiful and healthy and absolutely miraculous. "What should we name her?" Grasha asked, gazing down at their daughter with wonder. Caleb thought for a moment. "Hope. Let us call her Hope, because that is what she represents. Hope for a better future, for a world where children like her can grow up without having to choose between their parents' peoples." "Hope Stanton," Grasha said softly, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." The village rallied around them as they adjusted to parenthood, with both human and orc neighbors bringing food and offering advice and helping with the countless small tasks that came with caring for an infant. Hope thrived under all the attention, growing strong and bright and curious about everything around her. As spring returned and Hope approached her first season of life, Caleb and Grasha began planning for their future in earnest. They wanted to expand their cottage, to build more space for their growing family. They talked about eventually starting a small farm, something that would be truly theirs. And they discussed how they would raise Hope, what values they would teach her, how they would help her navigate the complexity of her dual heritage. "We tell her the truth," Grasha said firmly. "We tell her that her parents come from peoples who have been at war, but that love and understanding are stronger than hatred. We teach her both human and orc ways and let her decide for herself what kind of person she wants to be. We teach her to be kind," Caleb added. "To see people as individuals rather than representatives of their species. To stand up for what is right even when it is difficult. We teach her to be strong. To defend herself and others who cannot defend themselves. And we teach her that she is loved, completely and unconditionally, for exactly who she is." Grasha smiled. "Yes, all of that." One evening in early summer, as Caleb and Grasha sat together on their doorstep watching Hope play in the grass, Owen approached with news. A messenger had come from one of the other peace settlements, bringing word that representatives from both human and orc governments had agreed to meet for preliminary peace talks. It was tentative, fragile, and might come to nothing. But it was also the first real diplomatic contact in over a decade. "Things are changing," Owen said, his weathered face hopeful. "Slowly, but they are changing. Settlements like ours are proving that humans and orcs can live together peacefully. More and more people on both sides are growing tired of the war. It might take years, even decades, but I truly believe we are moving toward peace." Caleb looked at Grasha, saw his own cautious hope reflected in her eyes. They had been through too much to be naive about the difficulties ahead. But they had also seen what was possible when people chose understanding over hatred, cooperation over conflict. "Whatever comes," Caleb said, taking Grasha's hand, "we will face it together." "Together," Grasha agreed. That night, after Hope was asleep and they had finished their evening chores, Caleb and Grasha lay together in the darkness and talked about their dreams for the future. They spoke of the farm they would build, the life they would create for their daughter, the possibility that Hope might one day have siblings. They talked about the peace negotiations and what they might mean, about the potential for a world where their love would not be extraordinary but simply normal. "You remember what you told me that night in the mountains?" Grasha asked. "You said that someday when the war ended we would have a peaceful life. A small farm, a garden maybe near the ocean." "I remember. I think we have that now, not by the ocean perhaps, but peaceful and ours. We built the life you dreamed of, Caleb. Against all odds, we actually did it." Caleb pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "We did. And every morning when I wake up next to you, every time I see our daughter smile, I am grateful beyond words. You gave me a life worth living, Grasha. You gave me the same. You saved me, that first day and every day since. Then we saved each other, and we will keep saving each other for the rest of our lives." They made love then, slow and tender, a reaffirmation of their bond and their commitment to each other. And afterward, as they drifted toward sleep, Caleb thought about that dawn when he had opened his door and found an orc woman standing guard, exhausted and alone and fiercely determined to protect a stranger. He had not known then that he was opening the door on his entire future, that the woman in the snow would become his partner, his love, and the mother of his child. He had not known that choosing kindness in that moment would lead to everything he now held dear. But looking back, he would not change a single moment, not even the hardest and most frightening ones, because they had all led here, to this perfect life with this perfect family. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. In the village, lights flickered in windows as other families settled in for the night. And in their small cottage, Caleb and Grasha and Hope Stanton slept peacefully, safe and warm and loved, a small family that represented the possibility of a better world. The next morning, Caleb woke early as was his habit and slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to disturb Grasha. He padded through their home, checking on Hope, who was sleeping soundly in her cradle, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. He stoked the fire in the hearth and put water on to boil for tea. And then, drawn by some impulse he could not name, he opened the front door and stepped out into the dawn. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with shades of pink and gold. Mist rose from the valley, creating an ethereal landscape that looked like something from a dream. Birds were beginning their morning songs, and somewhere in the distance, Caleb could hear the lowing of cattle and the sounds of the village waking up. He stood there for a long moment, drinking in the peace and beauty of it all, feeling more content than he had ever imagined possible. This was home. This was family. This was everything he had been searching for without knowing he was searching. Behind him, he heard the door open and turned to see Grasha emerging, wrapped in a blanket, her hair tousled from sleep. She came to stand beside him, leaning against his shoulder, and together they watched the sunrise paint the world in gold. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning," he replied, wrapping his arm around her. "Did I wake you?" "No, I just noticed you were gone and wanted to be where you were." She kissed his cheek, then rested her head against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am, how grateful." How absolutely impossible this all is, and yet how perfectly real. Grasha smiled, that slow, beautiful smile that never failed to make his heart skip. It is real. We made it real, you and I. We chose this, fought for this, built this with our own hands. And we will keep building it, Caleb said. For ourselves, for hope, for everyone who comes after us and dreams of a world where love is stronger than hatred. Together, Grasha said, echoing their vow from the night before. Together, Caleb agreed. Always together. They stood in the doorway as the sun rose fully above the horizon, bathing the valley in warm light, the beginning of a new day full of possibility and promise. Behind them, hope began to stir and make the small sounds that meant she would soon want feeding. Around them, the village was coming to life, neighbors emerging to begin their day's work. And ahead of them stretched a future they would build together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, always moving forward into the light. The story of how they found each other would become something of a legend in New Haven and the other peace settlements. People would tell of the human veteran and the exiled orc warrior who had chosen mercy over violence and love over hatred, who had traveled across a war-torn land to find a place where they could simply be together. They would tell of the dawn when Caleb opened his door and found Grasha standing guard, and how that single moment of unexpected kindness had changed both their lives forever. But for Caleb and Grasha themselves, the story was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about all the small things that followed, the daily acts of love and partnership that transformed two lonely people into a family. It was about the life they built, the daughter they raised, the peace they helped create simply by refusing to accept that peace was impossible. Years would pass. Hope would grow strong and smart and beautiful, a living bridge between two peoples who were slowly learning to see each other as something other than enemies. More children would come, filling the cottage with noise and laughter and love. The war would eventually end, not with a dramatic final battle, but with a gradual exhaustion and a recognition that continued fighting served no one. And settlements like New Haven would become the model for a new way of living, where humans and orcs and all the other peoples of the world learned to coexist in peace. But all of that was still to come. On this morning, all that mattered was a man and a woman standing together in the doorway of their home, watching the sunrise and holding each other close, grateful for the impossible gift of their love and the life they had fought so hard to claim. They had started with nothing but a moment of courage and compassion on a frozen dawn, and they had built everything from that single foundation. Caleb looked at Grasha, saw the morning light catching in her dark eyes, saw the smile playing at the corners of her mouth, and felt his heart swell with emotion too large for words. So he simply pulled her closer and kissed her, pouring all his love and gratitude and joy into the gesture, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. And for that perfect moment, nothing else in the world existed except the two of them and the love they shared. Then Hope's cries grew more insistent, demanding attention, and they both laughed and went inside to begin their day. There was work to be done, a child to care for, a life to live. And they would live it together, facing whatever came with courage and kindness, and the unshakable knowledge that they had found something precious and rare. They had found home. They had found love. They had found each other. And in a world that had tried so hard to keep them apart, that was the greatest victory of all.